Thank you very much, Claudia. I am thrilled to be here. I am stoked, as they say. I've been coming to this conference for about 25 years, I think, and I've had to sit through a lot of really dull keynotes. So now it's my turn to get my own back. Okay. So obviously there isn't much time for discussion here. There's a bit of time at the end, but also tomorrow morning I'm doing a session for the academic contribution to practice at 10:20. If you've got any questions, comments, please come and talk to me. That session is going to be quite kind of more like a discussion. Also feel free to email me at any time if you disagree or agree with anything I'm going to say. What year is this? 1997, I think. Now I'm confused. Okay. So I think it's 1997 when Princess Diana, Princess of Wales died, when Tony Blair, New Labour, all this kind of stuff was happening, the Spice Girls. So it's quite, a while ago. It's quite an exciting, maybe or maybe not year in the UK. And this was in 1997. And in 1998, in January, there was a conference going on in Eastbourne. And a kind of mid-career academic was giving a presentation, this is 17 years ago, on what is an evidence-based approach to practice and do we need an occupational psychology. Was anybody there by any chance? Yeah, some of you there. So for you, like me, some of this might be Groundhog Day. So I've been banging on about this for a long time. Doesn't make it right, of course, but I have been talking about it for quite a long time. Okay, I want to do sort of a bit of preamble here about some assumptions. I'm assuming that telling you these things will help clarify what I'm going to say. I'm going to go through these very quickly, just to point out I've got way too much material. Okay, so I'm going to edit it as I go along, and I'm happy to give you a copy of the slides there, so I'm going to kind of go through some very fast. So what I'm going to say may make you feel bad. I've got a sad face. It really should be an angry face, I guess. Don't take it personally. This isn't about you. This is nothing to do with an academic-practitioner divide. I'm assuming that being better informed is a good thing. Now, you may not agree with that, but that's my assumption. And I'm not talking about faith or things we want to believe. And I'm going to argue that OP is not about effectiveness and well-being, it's about something else. And also, my starting point is if OP is a profession, it could do much better. So they are my starting points, or some of them. So, you may know this quote from Maya Angelou, people will forget what you say, blah, 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 but they never forget how you made them feel. Well, I kind of want you to forget how I make you feel, and I want you to focus on what I'm actually saying, okay? Because I think that's much more important. Don't take it personally. It's about institutions. We all work in contexts where we're constrained. There are incentives that drive us in particular ways. So it's not about you or me, but we may be good examples of some of the things that's going on here. And it may reflect wider stuff about that's happening to professions more widely in our society, I think, to some extent. And this is nothing to do, this drives me nuts, with this idea of an academic practitioner divide. It's absolutely nothing to do with that. Academics are no more or less evidence-based than anyone else in their research practices, and I'll come on to that later quickly. Academics, remember, are practitioners too. They're practitioners of teaching and they're practitioners of research. And as I say, they're not very evidence-based either. And there is a real divide in this context, a real divide between people who think this is an academic practitioner divide and people who don't think it's an academic practitioner divide. And it isn't. It's complete red herring. It's nothing to do with that. Better informed is probably better. This is my assumption, that if you have more data, you analyse the problem more effectively, you understand possible solutions, you'll make more effective decision-making, you'll learn more about what you do as well, and also you take actions that are more likely to result in the desired outcomes. Now, it might seem odd to say this, but quite often when I'm talking about this, some people don't agree with that. I don't know what they really think, but they don't seem to agree with it. That is my assumption. You may not agree with it, but that's my assumption. Some things are about faith. Do you recognise where this is from? Yes, it was on, I think, the wall in, I don't really watch it, but Mulder or Scully's thing. I want to believe. They're all things we want to believe. We want to believe that diversity is good or good for business. We want to believe that. We want to believe all kinds of stuff. I'm not talking about that kind of thing. Is this a good question? Any of you seen this recently? So for some reason, particularly, I think it's probably around the UK, but in London in particular, Jehovah's Witnesses have been very active in popping up outside every sort of rail station, even quite small, and giving out things. And I saw this a couple of months ago. I thought it was quite good, quite a good question. Because it's not necessarily a bad question. We should take all these questions seriously. What do you mean by Satan? What do you mean by real? Now, I'm guessing there are some people in this room that believe in Satan. There are probably some people who don't. But both positions, I would say, are kind of slightly faith-based, possibly. And I'm not talking about those kinds of belief. But maybe it is possible to get some good kind of evidence. But I think most people who think Satan is real probably aren't interested. So, of course, being quite interested in evidence-based, I went on Google to find out if there's any evidence about Satan existing. And, of course, there is some on the Answers to Prayer website, where God is first, ! And it says here, the physical evidence of Satan's existence is quite clear, blah, 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 blah. Death, sin, broken marriages, illnesses, murders, theft. So to not believe in the existence of the devil on this planet is like walking in a forest and wondering where all the trees are. Isn't it just like, it's just like that, I think. Satan's all around us, more and more evident, all that baby murdering. Okay, no doubt about it, etc., etc. So what I'm talking about is not things based on faith. So not talking about stuff you just want to believe or like to believe. I'm really not talking about that. And that's fine. That's okay, but it's not what I'm talking about today. So if one test of this is for anything you believe, if you cannot think of anything that would in principle change your mind, then that is faith. Okay, and that is fine, but it's not what I'm talking about. I don't think it's what organisational psychologists should do either, as it happens. But yes, I'm not talking about faith. It is a question of where we draw the line partly. Does anything go? My assumption is no, not anything does go. What is probably okay, what's probably not okay? Where do we draw the line? How do we draw the line? How big is it and so on, and how do we decide? So my assumption is about this. It's not that some things are good and some things are terrible, but there are lines to be drawn somewhere, I think, for any profession about what it is acceptable. OP is not about effectiveness, and I feel quite strongly about this. It's about organisations and it's about psychology. So if you just break it down a bit, it seems to me our clients have problems and objectives. They do, we don't necessarily, and we use our knowledge to help them get there. And I think it's extremely dangerous to confuse what organisational psychology is with what our clients want to achieve. They're not the same things. Okay, we shouldn't want our clients to make profit. Why should we? It's not our job. It's their job. They're managers. We're not managers. It's their role to do that. And you may or may not agree personally and professionally what the problem and objectives are of the clients you work with. You may or may not, and I think that's very important. Would you necessarily work for any client to do anything, to achieve any objective they want to achieve? I'm guessing not. You may, one recent example of this, do you recognise these two people? Any of you? No? If I said, how many psychologists does it take to devise a CIA enhanced interrogation program? Does that give you a clue? As the Daily Mail would put it, the kings of torture, who made 50 million, blah, 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 blah. Somewhat they say is fairly accurate. This is based on the CIA report, or not the Senate report that came out just before Christmas, basically suggesting that these two individuals were helped to design and sometimes oversee some of the interrogation tactics, which some people think are pretty close to torture. Those particular individuals had no experience as interrogators, no background in counter-terrorism, and no cultural linguistic experience in the area they're working in. They had contracts worth $180 million at the time, but the contracts were stopped, and their businesses got $81 million for doing that stuff. So I think you do have to separate out what you as a psychologist think your clients are doing and whether or not you feel you want to help them do that. It's not our job to make those clients' objectives come true. It's their job. We are helping them to do that, which means we need to think about what it is they're trying to do. So I think there is an important distinction there. If you want to know more about it, it's in this book. So what do psychologists do? Well, I think they apply psychology to sort of problems in various ways. They do not own the client's goals. The client owns those. So the direct goals of OP is not to enhance well-being and effectiveness, which is often trotted out. They may be our goals as well, but we shouldn't confuse those two things. I'll come back to that kind of later on. My final assumption is that if OP is a profession it could do better. Now, are we, and this is a distinction I think is quite important, are we basically guns for hire that will just do our thing to whoever pays us? Is that what we do? Is that what it is? Or is something more akin to a profession in which we are approached by a client with a presenting problem, we analyse, diagnose and assess that problem by collecting various kinds of evidence, we propose possible solutions to that, showing their likely downsides and effectiveness, and then we discuss with the clients and agree whether they're going to do it or not. What are we? Are we service provider? Nothing wrong with being a service provider, but it's a completely different model, and it's not something you necessarily need a master's degree for either. But what are we supposed to be? And I think we're supposed to be a profession which goes through those kinds of steps. And I'm assuming we could do it much better. That's my assumption. You may think we're pretty good at it and everything's fine. Okay, then you won't enjoy this very much. All right. So I also have a sore throat. Okay, these are what I'm actually, now I've done my preamble, I'm now going to get into the main body. I'm going to cover these kind of points. So, what does evidence-based means? We use evidence all the time in our work. We do it all the time, even we use a little of it, but do we use enough of it? Do we use sufficient evidence from different sources? Do we critically evaluate it? Do we pull it together and try and make sense of it? So it's not a question of whether we do or don't. Evidence-based practice is not about that. All practitioners are evidence-based. It's those questions we need to think about. Are we doing it enough? Are we looking at the right kinds of evidence? Are we looking at it critically and so on? We also, one way of thinking about this, we use evidence all the time in our everyday lives. So it's not a weird thing. You don't switch on your evidence gathering switch and start doing it. You're doing it the whole time anyway. For example, simple questions like, what film shall I watch? What kind of hotel? Should I apply for the job? Have I put on weight over Christmas, or have my clothes shrunk? Whatever the question is, you will use information or evidence to help you answer those questions. So in the case of films, you may choose on the basis of actors or sequels or genre, or you may look to databases like IMDb, film made in Glasgow a few years ago, and you may look at the scores and go, okay, so I want to watch a really good film, I'm not sure about this, 6.3 out of 10, is that high enough for me? Or do I really only going to go and see things if it's kind of 9 out of 10? Or am I a kind of crazy, wacky person that hates films everyone else likes, so I'm going to go and see films that get quite low ratings because I'm kind of on the edge. I like really strange films that people don't like. And you look at different ratings. You might say, I only want to look at the professional critics' reviews. I'm not interested in what the people think. Who cares what the people think? I want to know what the professionals think. Or you might think, no, I want to know what the people think. I don't care about the professionals. So again, when we're using this evidence, we don't just look at it and automatically take it on board. We critically appraise it. What I was doing then is critically appraising. Can I trust it? Is it valid? Is it reliable? And so on. Same with hotels. TripAdvisor, I'm sure many of you use this, is this hotel. This is another hotel. Oh my God, that's number 17. That's number 23. Does that matter? This has got 4.5. That's only got 4. Oh gosh, do we really care about that? So again, you're going to use this as information. This is, again, the TripAdvisor on restaurants. This is a restaurant called the Gannet, which is fairly new. You can see it's number 153. It doesn't sound very good out of over 1,000 restaurants in Glasgow. These are the ratings, and these are some of the things. Look, what an awful dining experience we had in this restaurant. The food we had was cold, overpriced, and the waiting staff were rude. Well, I'm reading and thinking, I really don't care about rude waiting staff. I really don't care. So I'm kind of already starting to dismiss this review. And then it goes on, save yourself no certain, don't bother trying this one. Nothing spectacular. We were disappointed. The portion size are on the small side. Well, you should eat before you go out. Come on. What are you talking about? Not Gannet. So then the food was tasty enough. Well, that's good. Tasty is good, I guess, in food. Except even though the belly which accompanied the board design was a bit greasy. Even though that's good. Greasy belly is good, right? It's not a bad thing. So again, I'm dismissing this. So in other words, you don't just look and go, oh yeah, they thought it was crap, I do too, I'm not going to go. You make judgments, and that's essentially what evidence-based practice is. It's using information to help decide. Then, of course, you've got the Guardian, and Marina Locker, well, she's professional, and she must be good, and she gives it these scores which don't look very good, but for her, they're not bad, actually. So do you trust this more or not? Which, do any of you read Which? Yeah, middle-class, anxious consumers, yeah, okay. You might be interested in a washing machine, and you kind of do this thing. I don't know if any of you would pay £900 for a washing machine. You might, if you're really into washing, or washing machines. But you do what most of us do, is you look at the price, you look at the percentage score, and you go down till you hit probably the hot point, because it's most bang for the buck. And then, as you all know, when you then go on the John Lewis website, because you're also anxious middle-class consumer, to try and buy, they're completely run out, because everyone else has done the same thing. Okay, so we use the information again. So evidence-based just means, looking at different kinds of sources and evidence, critically appraising it, saying, is it reliable, can I trust it, and putting it together in some way to inform a decision. That's it. Simply, that's what it means. The underlying logic is that practitioners always do use different kinds of evidence, but the question is, do they do it enough? And the argument is the more and more valid bits of information they use and incorporate, the better the quality, the decision will be, and the outcome will be. So again, it's a question of degree, how much is enough? And I'm going to argue that in general, and also I don't know, in general, it seems we don't do that enough, in my opinion, within organisational psychology. The idea of evidence-based practice is actually been around for a long time. It first started in medicine, but it's been applied to many, many, many other fields. Many of these fields have kind of started centres and so on. So here's medicine, here's policing, here's policy, here's conservation, education, agriculture, aged care, social work, and evidence-based management, which Claudia that I've been involved with. And also more recently, some MSc students from the Erasmus program in Europe have started a website called Science for Work, again, promoting evidence-based practice, in this case, in organisational psychology. So it's not a weird idea. It's not a new idea. It's not a striking or amazing idea. And it's quite common in other kinds of fields. So what's the problem? The problem is that practitioners, as I said, do use evidence, but do they use it enough? And also, OPs and their clients, clearly to me, use techniques that are not particularly supported by evidence, and it's a solution in search of a problem. So they do stuff, but it's not clear why, what the basis of it is. And also they're not strongly aware or use the best available academic, scientific, and other evidence for decision making. So evidence-based practice in any field is designed to try and help with that problem. Okay, it's not going to make everything all right, but it's designed to help with that particular problem. And this is a definition. It's about making decisions through the conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of different sources of information. Conscientious obviously means you try. Explicit means it's not just in your head. You write it down, you share it, you codify it in some way. Judicious means you make a judgment. Is it valid? Is it reliable? Do I believe it? Can I trust it? And so on. And then you collect evidence from these different sources, these four sources. So it's the external evidence, which is the academic stuff, it's the stakeholders, the people in the organisation, it's the context, and it's also your experience as a practitioner. Okay, so it's not just about one form of evidence. So if you were, it's kind of, well, one way to think about it is quite focused and specific. It's a real problem that you're trying to do, not a vague one. You try to look at the likely causes of it in that context, and also possible solutions by bringing together different sources of evidence. So this is an example. If you were presented with a problem of high absence, and you're asked as a psychologist to go in and talk to HR about the problem with that high absence, you might ask these questions. So your own expertise, have I seen this before? What do I think is going on? What's happening? What do I think is going to work? What are my hunches? And the reason for doing that is partly because your experience may be very valid, but the other reason for doing it is, like it or not, that is going to be shaping what you decide to do. So by making it explicit and critically evaluating it, the idea is you'll bring it to the surface and be able to judge it more clearly. It's also the local context. What actually is the absence rate? What kinds of absences and where? Is there absence management already in place? What's happening? That's the organisational stuff. Then we go to the academic bit, the research evidence. It might be, is the absence rate high? It may be a call centre in the northwest of England, and the absence rate is 4%. And you say, actually, that's pretty good. You're doing well. So don't worry, you could try and make it lower, but actually, for your sake, that's pretty good. So why would you throw lots of money at trying to solve this problem that doesn't seem to be much of a problem for you in this context? So it's the research evidence, also evidence about what causes absence, and also perspectives of people are going to be affected. So what do managers think is going on? What do prospective people are going to be affected by the intervention? What do they think about the intervention and so on? So essentially it's bringing it together, and it's not about one form of evidence. These are some very common myths that evidence means quantitative scientific evidence. It doesn't. It just means information. Okay? It does not mean science. It does not mean quantitative. People think evidence-based practice means, I cannot use my professional expertise. It doesn't mean that. Your professional expertise is part of the evidence. People think evidence can prove things. Evidence cannot prove anything. Proof is a mathematical concept or logical concept. It's nothing to do with evidence. You can't prove anything with evidence. Evidence also doesn't tell you the truth. Truth is a whole different thing. Truth is a spiritual, aesthetic thing. It's nothing to do with a data set. Okay, it's nothing to do with that. So it's not about truth, it's not about proof, it's not about new studies. And this is where journals like Harvard Business Review, but many others are responsible for this kind of thing too, very much emphasize new exciting things. It isn't about that either. It's about a body of evidence. Single studies almost never matter. It's about a body of evidence. People also think getting a lot of information will give you the answer. It won't. Or it might, but it's very unlikely. It'll give you more information to make a better informed judgment. It won't give you the answer. And as we all know, for any decision we take, the more information we get, very rarely a clear answer pops out, but we're still likely to make a better decision. Also some people think doing evidence-based practice means you just do what research evidence says. No, it doesn't. A lot of research evidence is very poor quality. A lot of research evidence is irrelevant. So no, it doesn't mean that either. People think if you don't have evidence, you can't do anything. You know, I haven't done a randomized control trial of what I like for breakfast, therefore I can't have any breakfast today. No, you just eat whatever you want, knowing you don't know what you really like. Fine. Okay, you don't need the evidence, but you just act knowing you haven't got the evidence. People also think experts know all this stuff. They don't. Experts are incredibly biased. And generally speaking, within hierarchies of evidence, say in medicine and other contexts, expert opinion is considered to be the lowest form of evidence, the lowest quality of evidence. So experts don't know stuff. You know, experts don't conduct a meta-analysis in the head for every problem. They can give you advice, they can give you their opinion, they can help you understand stuff, but experts do not know about evidence, and they're very biased and have vested interests. This is a particular one I think in OP, but some people seem to think if you come across what might be an approved tool, like assessment centres, well, they're good. I think I've seen some studies on this. I think there's some meta-analyses. They're good. Some people think, I think in this field, that if you just do an assessment centre, they're not doing it, if you just do one, then everything is kind of fine, because there are some studies that show that. No, it's not. That's not evidence-based practice. That's like saying there's a medical treatment like antibiotics. Because we know it works, if you just do it for anything, it's probably going to be quite good. No, it isn't. It's going to be good for some particular things in some situations. So simply looking at something that seems to be kosher and doing it is not evidence-based either, because it depends on all those other sources of information and evidence. So there's some of the kind of myths around it. So some immediate questions you may have is that it? It is actually, but I'm still going to bang on for at least another 20 minutes. It is it. Isn't it sort of obvious and common sense? Yes, it is bleeding obvious and very common sense. But the big deal is it's not happening very much, in my view. And you feel free to disagree with me, either at the end of this talk tomorrow, email, abuse on Twitter, however you want to do it. Feel free to agree with me. But why isn't it happening? I think it's because we're all rewarded for doing different things. We're rewarded for doing things that are not evidence-based. And I'll go into that now in a bit more detail. This is, to me, for our field in particular, a real point compared to, say, clinical psychology, where the main employer is the National Health Service. Most OPs are freelance workers, small consultants. I don't have the figures, but I think it's huge as a proportion, maybe 80%. Okay, so they depend on getting work constantly and working on small short-term projects. Their clients are mostly HR managers who, for the most part, have already decided what they want. They want an assessment centre. They want some training on emotional intelligence. That's what they want. They've decided. So you go in with your big evidence-based hat on and say, well, we wonder what the problem is. Can we think about it? Can we analyse it? They're going to go, no, I just want. Our managers aren't very emotionally intelligent. We want to give them some training. And you're going to go, well, how do you know they're not? And why would that make a difference? And does emotional intelligence matter anyway? Not very much, but hey, it's popular, okay? So, you're not going to be very popular. So if you go and start asking those questions, you're not going to get the work. Someone else is going to get it who will ask less questions. Generally, not always, just generally, because they've already decided. And if your client has already decided what they want as a professional and you need the work, there's very little you can do. There's very little, unless you don't need to eat or have got personal income or whatever it is, you can't do it. And you know also that if you walk away from that work, there are a massive queue of people who will do it if you won't, many of whom are not occupational psychologists. Because don't forget, as far as I'm aware, there's nothing an occupational psychologist does that someone else can't do. This is, again, a big challenge for us. Anyone else, virtually, who the client believes can do it, can do it. There's no kind of real restriction. The question is then, do we get much of an opportunity to practice evidence-based? I would say not. And I think this is a kind of inconvenient truth for this profession in this country. As psychologists, we often don't get a chance to do this, even if we want to. Is that unfair? No response. Excellent. Okay. Yes, it's fair. Okay, one response. Okay, so reminder, and this is what evidence-based practice is. It's being conscious, explicit, and judicious, and pulling them together. And you might say about any profession, is this profession, whether it's policing, social work, government policymakers, is this an evidence-based profession? And these are some criteria you can apply to actually try and work it out. So, for example, they'd use the term evidence-based. A profession could be evidence-based, but never have heard of or never used the term. I think it's unlikely. So if they are actually taking an evidence-based approach, it's likely they'd use that term. They'd also be able to get research summaries or systematic reviews. I'm not going to talk about that much now, but again, an important thing about being an evidence-based practitioner in any field is you have to have really good summaries of the available evidence. You can't sift through hundreds of dull, boring academic articles every time you've got a client question. You just can't. So you need systematic reviews, and these are not the same as meta-analyses necessarily of that stuff. You also need to be able to get hold of primary research as well. You would expect any evidence-based profession to be sceptical about stuff. You'd also expect to be some demand. You'd also expect to see that practices was following evidence-based principles, and also the training and CPD were adopting evidence-based approaches to practice. So if we apply these 7 criteria to psychology, so IO psychology, what do we see? Is the term evidence-based well known in OP? Not really. This looks quite impressive, and by the way, this is just a Google search, and Google search has gone weird, and it's probably not very accurate at all. But just as a very rough guide, evidence-based occupational psychology generates 5 hits. If you exclude, there's a video put out by DOP some years ago, which had the word evidence-based occupational psychology in it. It's nothing to do with evidence-based practice, but it had it in it, and they managed to distribute this very, very, very widely. So if you exclude hits on that, there's only 5, in fact. So I'd say it's not particularly well known in this field as an expression, as an idea. Again, doesn't mean we're not doing it, but it seems unlikely. Are systematic reviews available? There are very few systematic reviews in our field. So if your client says we want to introduce 360-degree appraisal, you might think, okay, I'm going to go and look and find out what is known about the effectiveness of this compared to other techniques for doing the same thing. It would take you a hell of a long time to get hold of all that stuff. There are no systematic reviews, or not many in this field. There are a few more now, but there aren't many. Can you get hold of a primary research article? Well, kind of. Can you get hold of everything you want if you remember the BPS? Just some of what you want, probably. Yeah. Okay, so you can get hold of some. So it's not bad, but you can't get hold of everything you want. Are we sceptical? I think we're not particularly. I think OP is very into fads and fashions. I think we have to be because our clients love it. We're not too sceptical. And again, can you think of anything you would look back historically in the last 20, 30 years now feel so that was a bit of a fad? Can you think of anything now that whenever you hear it, you go, oh gosh, it's not another... Yeah? Okay, you don't have to name it because you've probably got 2 weeks' work on it next week, but it's okay. It's okay. Yeah? We're aware of this stuff going on. An evidence-based profession would not do that. It would say, wait a minute, what's the problem? What is this new thing? By definition, for new things, there's not enough evidence to know whether it works or not. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it or try it, but you have to then evaluate it and build a body of evidence around it. Also, what are our clients paying for? I said before, I think they're not paying for evidence-based practice on the whole. They're paying for us to do something when they've already decided what we want. Do we, in that sense, have much power in the client relationship? If we're very dependent on getting more and more work, I think we don't. If you're employed in a big organisation, I think you probably do. If there's a big group of you, probably do. You have more power. But for individual, freelance, people working in small consultancies, I think you don't have much power. Does practice follow those principles? I don't know, but I don't think that much. It does a little bit maybe, but again, a lot of it is applying techniques that have already been decided. So I think not very much. Does training and CPD? Not really. OPs are not trained evidence-based practice, but they're trained in universities on master's programs which use a standard, filling an empty vessel with information model. So you just give people knowledge, and then they answer exams and essays, and then they've learnt stuff, right? That's not evidence-based at all in many ways. We don't teach OPs how to learn themselves. CPD is also not very evidence-based. So in other fields, evidence-based CPD means giving practitioners, if you like, real problems to deal with, and then helping them get those different kinds of evidence, the 4 sources, and critically appraising it, and helping them make a decision. It's not about telling them about a new thing or reviewing a field. It's about dealing with problems, because that's what you need to do in your work. So I think not much. How evidence-based are our clients, say most HR managers? Not much. HR's renowned for being into fads and fashions. I think there's a huge consultancy industry built up around this. As a profession, HR actually feels pretty marginalised. So there's an issue here that some people pointed out. If we kind of hitch ourselves up to HR, we already may feel a bit marginalised, so why we hitch up to a profession that itself feels quite marginalised within organisations, which is a kind of bit of a challenge. And this is a recent quote from Jeff Pfeffer. It seems in HR you can have no intellectual curiosity, and this will not disqualify you as a competent practitioner. The level of ignorance and indifference is astounding, and perhaps explains why HR has such a poor reputation. Now, that may be a bit of a caricature, but the question is HR ready or interested in evidence-based practice? And if they are not, we can't do it. It's that simple, I think, at the moment. If they're not interested, we can't practice in that way, because they don't want that. So we're a bit kind of stuck, I think. These are some examples of fads, BPR, I'm not going to go into all of these, but every fad, as you know, has to have a big book, and it often like this, and it often has like a big stamp, a boilerplate on it or something, and every book is endorsed by the other people that write the books. Excellence, TQM, talent, don't get me started on the war for talent. I will tomorrow if you want. People have studied cycles of fads. This is an example of quality circles, and you can see how they kind of come into fashion and they disappear again. They come into fashion and disappear again. So HR is quite into these kinds of fads. And fad, I think, at the moment is employee engagement, as an example. And if you look, again, it's not very accurate, but if you go do a Google Trend search for job satisfaction in the red and employee engagement on the right, you can see what seems to be happening is people searching for job satisfaction is going down, people searching for engagement is going up. So maybe one is kind of just replacing the other in some sort of way. There's two fundamental questions. This is just an example about employee engagement, that most practitioners or consultants will argue that basically if you can increase engagement, and increases cause increase in performance, okay? Because if they don't, who gives a damn about engagement? Because that's the whole point of it, according to these consultants. The other point is that if you intervene to increase engagement, it will subsequently increase performance. They are the two fundamental questions. And if the answer to those is no, it doesn't, or we don't know, you're screwed. You're absolutely screwed, because you're basing what you're doing on nothing. Okay, so what does the evidence say? Has anyone read a systematic review of this? There aren't any yet, but I've done a very unsystematic review. And in it, you kind of find out interesting things, that there are huge definitional problems. That, did you know the Gallup Q12 measure, only one study, but it correlates 0.91 with the measure of job satisfaction at unit level. So it's kind of job satisfaction, kind of, more or less. And if you apply, given those two questions, if you apply a hierarchy of evidence to it, there are no systematic reviews of those two questions about employee engagement. There are 3 meta-analyses, but they're all cross-sectional, so they cannot answer those cause-effect questions. And if you can't answer those cause-effect questions, then you've got nothing much to base it on. There's no longitudinal studies. There are around 10 cross-sectional studies. There's tons of commercial non-peer-reviewed consultancy, and there's tons of expert opinion, views, advocates, and so on. So as a field, and this is published on the Engage for Success website, a paper I did, a little report I did. But so it's quite kind of interesting. If you talk to HR managers, this is just an example, and I have, about these results. Some of them really like the challenge. A few kind of laugh and smirk and go, yeah, I thought that was kind of a fad. Not the people who've got employee engagement in their job title. They don't smirk so much. They do not smirk so much. They are offended in a how very dare you style. How very, and I go, look, I'm not saying don't do it, but just don't pretend it's this wonderful thing, because there isn't any evidence. It might be a wonderful thing, and who knows, in 5 years, 10 years, maybe there'll be huge body of evidence that says employee engagement is absolutely brilliant. Maybe, I'm talking about now, what we know now. So you can't make these claims on the basis of nothing. And I had an experience just before Christmas. I was at a meeting of so-called senior leaders. I always hate these expressions, but senior people in HR in London, organised by CIPD, just a small kind of group. And I just said to them, what is the evidence for employee engagement? Does increasing employee engagement increase performance? And can you intervene to increase engagement? Simple question. I said, what is your evidence? And the kind of responses I got, they certainly were not aware of any of the, well, maybe not all the published evidence, but the kind of things they said to me were, you can just see it. You can just see it. This is what we're dealing with. Seriously, you can just see it. So you can imagine you went to a social worker or a policymaker or whoever, and they say, oh, I can just see this person is, well, can you really just, oh, well, you don't need to sort of do any training or anything. You just see things. You don't need a qualification, you can just know things are happening. Well done you know. Also, I read a paper once. Someone said, I saw Mike West talk about it. No, he didn't. He talked about something else. It wasn't employee engagement. But anyway, he did talk about it, I'm sure. And someone else said, I saw it on a graph. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we saw this really good presentation by some consultants who'd done it. And you could see it on a graph. So what was it? Well, you could see that there's some units with low engagement, some with high, and the ones with more, it's okay, so you saw it on a graph. Yeah, okay, that's it. That was enough for you to develop a whole HR policy. Good for you, again. But this is sort of an issue that if you are dealing with practitioners who just think about things a bit differently, then it's quite hard to persuade them to be evidence-based. And people do get quite offended if you suggest their favourite concept may not have much to back it up. And I think it's a case that men, like we all do, they want to or need to believe in things like employee engagement. They need to believe it. It's very important for HR in general. So just an example, just one example. Why fads follows? Well, they're quick, they use a defensive strategy, they're often very well marketed. There's also general belief, another of my favourite expressions, blue chip, there's a general belief that if people are, doing this stuff, particularly big companies, it must be good, right? Which is kind of a completely erroneous argument. And also it can be kind of a bit of a quick fix, which by definition needs another replacement. So again, as professional occupational psychologists, most of our clients are working in a slightly different way for different reasons, achieving different things. If we walk in with that, again, my evidence-based thing on, they're probably not going to like it very much because that's not what they necessarily want from us. So I think there are espoused and implicit goals. Espoused goals are things like to do what works, to help the organisation for its mission, to solve problems, to do what matters, etc., etc. But implicit goals are often to get things done. Doesn't matter what you do, just get it done. Roll it out. Make it happen. Is it bollocks? Who cares? It happened. Well done. Have a promotion. So it's rolling things out, making stuff up, because there are so few evaluations. It may be to avoid trouble, it may be to fix political problems, it may be to meet targets, to favour those who help you, and to do what higher-ups want you to hear. So there are these explicit and implicit, I think, incentives, and I'll come on to some others for academics in a minute. So we're going to talk about that now. What about consultancies? So consultancies, again, some kinds of consultancies can add to this sort of problem because they must keep selling. Because that's what they do, and they are not rewarded for whether their advice or services work because they're not evaluated on the whole. So the incentive for a consultant is to just sell stuff, products and services. So you persuade clients they probably need something, you sell them the technique or idea, you keep selling, you saturate the market till everybody's got it, and then you have to think of something new because everybody's got it. So you think of a new thing, you develop it, you develop a product or service, and you sell it, and you keep doing it. Rinse and repeat. And you just keep doing it. And this is what some people think is actually keeps the fad market going partly, is the business model of some consultancies. And it's all based on the fact that these things are not particularly evaluated. And maybe people don't want them to be evaluated, but they're not. So you don't know what works. Related concept is a quick fix, that you just do things because you think they're going to help you with an ill-defined problem. And my favourite example of this is a kitchen equipment analogy. Can any of you think of, in your kitchen, of an item of equipment that you bought probably some time ago that you never ever use? Juicer. Yes, what else? Bread maker, juicer, rice maker, salads. Are they all useful? They can. Well, again, all these things can be useful for some people, but they're oversold. These are the examples of things you get. If you take the kind of pasta maker, probably branded by Jamie Oliver, you probably had this vague fantasy that, you're going to go home, summer's evening, nice bottle of Rioja, make a nice ragu, yeah? Windows open, birds are singing, and make some pasta, make some nice tagliatelle, delicious. And you did it, and it made a mess, and it wasn't that nice, and it wasn't that better than packet stuff anyway, and so it goes in the cupboard, and then in about 2 or 3 years' time, all these things show up in charity shops. So if you want to find out about kitchen fads, go to charity shops, because you'll see. And this is such, so obviously, if it's just our own juice that we never use, that's fine. But if you're a manager or making important decisions, it's quite important you don't do that or try and avoid doing that. Diet industry is a great example of this where, there's a quick fix kind of thing where there's herbs and tablets. And again, for most people, most of the time, not everyone, losing weight is a very simple, it's not simple, but it's a simple formula of eating less and expending more calories. That's kind of it. But the problem is that's slow, it's difficult, and it's really boring. So what is better than to take a kind of pill? There's even websites, it's just one of them, that actually show you which kind of pills work better, and they give them all ratings, and they all come from, all the ingredients seem to come from kind of rainforests. And have you ever noticed that there's something about rainforest where obviously the ingredients from there are just more slimming than ingredients from, I don't know, Fife or something. I don't know. There's also the cookie diet. And there's also more than one cookie diet because you can compare the so-called cookie diet. So this is another example, I think, of a kind of fad type thing. Why do people follow them? They promise to deliver a lot and do it fast. They look simple, they're new and shiny, they're going to make everything all right. And people often say, well, is evidence-based practice itself a fad? Well, it isn't according to these criteria because it will not necessarily make you feel good. It's not that simple. It may not contain your anxieties. It may make you feel much worse. That you thought you knew what you were doing and everything was right with the world. You start digging around and go, oh my God, this isn't actually what I thought. So it's not really a fad in that sense, I think. Okay. Oh yeah, just in case you think I'm immune. Any of you ever bought Banana Guard? Yeah? Any of you still use your Banana Guard? Well done. Okay. I bought Banana Guard thinking I was going to use it. And I didn't use it, but I maybe used it once or twice. And I realised I just thought it was fun, and having this product created a need in me to buy it. So I had to imagine in my head I had a problem, two things. One, I carried bananas around a lot. And secondly, I had a problem with squashed bananas. So I kidded myself, I had that issue that suddenly this fun thing I saw was going to resolve. And of course, I was fooling myself because actually I hardly ever carry bananas around anyway. I'm never more than about, 4 minutes away from a banana. I don't go into the middle of the Pennines. I'm near shops nearly all the time. And the other thing is I never remember having a problem with a squashed banana. So I just thought this was going to help me. And again, I think people buy stuff, and HR directors are probably no different. They buy stuff for ill-defined problem that looks fun, it looks like, yeah, that's going to be good. And they reconfigure a non-problem into a problem that this is going to fix, which of course it won't. They didn't have that problem in the first place. So if you go on Amazon, you can also see people who bought the Banana Guard also bought these things. The Fruit Flaces inflatable fruit case, which is actually kind of to protect soft fruit, I understand. You put like a peach or nectarine or plum in it, you blow into it, you zip it up in it. Any of you ever bought one of those? No? Okay. You drew the line there, Banana Guard and a banana-shaped stress reliever. So you can see that people who bought this just have a general anxiety about squash fruit. I think it probably goes back to childhood. They're just into bananas and they're quite anxious. Is what I think is stress relief. Yeah. So we all do it. The point is we all do this. No one is sort of superior in this sense. Now, a quick aside, got 5 minutes, it's going to be very, very quick then. Okay, academics. We are teachers and researchers and academics, okay? How evidence-based are we? Well, the first thing is, as educators, we don't really train OPs out to be evidence-based. We adopt the Sensitive Vessel model. We're not very evidence-based on our educational practices. As you know, standing up and talking to people, as we're doing now, is not generally a very good way for people to learn stuff. It's all right, but it's not particularly good, but that's what we do. We look at certain student outcomes, particularly student satisfaction, as though somehow this is an indicator that this is good education, which of course has nothing to do with that. But that's kind of what we focus on. So as educators, we're not very evidence-based, but as academics, as research, we're not very evidence-based. We're obsessed with journal rankings, how good articles are. We produce research which is not particularly useful, even to other researchers. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. We don't produce systematic reviews that might be useful to practitioners because we're not rewarded for doing it. We conducting relevant research is not valued, and we make a lot of crimes against science, including replications and negative results. Did you know, you may not know, if you do a replication, everyone understands replication is important for science, it's almost impossible to get it published in this field. Impossible. If you do a perfectly good study and all the results are null or negative, you can't get it published. Yeah? Bullshit, right? Crime against science. But that's how we roll in academia. And this has consequences for if you want to look at the academic literature. It has really serious consequences. So I think one of these espoused goals as researchers to advance understanding, use the best techniques, publishing all the results, etc., being honest about evidence. But we actually have implicit goals to advance career, get whatever techniques we use to get you published, like null hypothesis significance testing. That's nonsense, absolute nonsense. But it's a routine way in our field, we look at the significance of things. Publishing positive results, exaggerating what we know, and locking up our evidence behind publishers' paywalls. We shouldn't do it. As researchers, we shouldn't be doing it. I won't talk about that. But I'll give you one example. So the impact factor of the top journals in business and management, and most IO journals will fit into that. The median impact factor is 1.56, which means over a 5-year period, on average, well, a median, articles from that journal are cited on average 1.5 times about, and they are the top 100 or so journals. So what this is like saying is, get a big empty warehouse, pay lots of academics to do research, fill it up with stuff, okay? Then eventually, maybe 1.5 times over 5 years, this lonely forklift truck comes along, plucks out an article, which someone reads and cites, and then puts it back again, that's it. Worse than that, it's locked up behind paywall. So even if this stuff was great, you can't even get hold of it, and you have to pay for it. Any of you ever pay for articles? Yeah? And clearly, well, they're a rip-off and they're very expensive. You don't know what you're getting. This is, just as an example, this is quite a reasonably long article, whatever, 18 pages, 19 pages, $42. Here's another one. This is a much shorter article, 3 pages, $42. Here's one that's very old, $42. So it seems to me the publishers are not actually very interested in selling this stuff. They're just, putting it. So again, from an evidence-based point of view, in terms of what science and research is supposed to be about, we as researchers are not being very evidence-based. Won't talk about all this, but there's a very good article by Keats and McDaniels in IO Psychology about this, looking at things like harking, which is changing your hypotheses after you've got the results. Yeah? Familiar for your MSc dissertations, perhaps? It's not just you, it's standard practice in academia. And also, I won't even talk about NHST now, but this is very good. This is across lots of disciplines. This is the percentage of positive results reported in journals from 1990 to 2007. This is across all fields. And as you can see, it's gone up from 70% to 2007 going up to about 86%. So it could be that researchers are getting so good at just predicting everything that they're getting more and more positive results. And if you continue that graph up, in about 10 years' time, we won't need to do any more research. All we have to do is think of a hypothesis and it'll be right. Brilliant. Okay? So we're kind of, corrupted as well. And the stuff about management research being fishy. The Economist is even concerned about this. So anyway, as an aside, they are. So just to conclude, okay, does it matter if evidence-based? In a way, no, it doesn't matter at all. Who cares? People seem to like what we do. We can earn a crust. Who cares, right? That's one kind of response. I understand that. But I think it diminishes the profession. It diminishes what we do because we don't know if what we do works or why it works. And also it's unethical. If you look at just some of the codes of ethics excerpts, things like informed consent, if you use a technique and you don't know pretty well the body of evidence that shows both the positive and negative effects of that technique, how can someone give informed consent? Because you can't tell them. Also, for example, psychologists should avoid harm. Do you know what harm are caused by our practices? Do you actually know? When you do whatever, Belbin off the top of my head, do you know if there are any harms to that? I don't know. Do you know? I'm not doing it. But if you're doing it, you kind of need to know. I think the burden of proof is on the person using the techniques, because often people say to me, well, you don't know it doesn't work. And I say, it doesn't matter if I don't know it doesn't work. Do you know it works? You are flogging this stuff, I'm not. So the burden of proof has to be on the person promoting and using it to say whether it is or not. And also, just because some good evidence it works doesn't mean it works here. If you look on LinkedIn, this is my final 3 slides, on LinkedIn, it's very hard to find out the way occupational psychologists kind of sell themselves or the things they say they do. So if you just go on LinkedIn and you look at chartered occupational psychologists, there are 719 results. And you can kind of match that with other words. And you get some idea here. Training is up there, it makes sense. Coaching. The last time I looked at this literature about 2 years ago, there actually is very little good quality evidence that coaching does anything worthwhile. Now, there may have been 50 super studies in the last 2 years. Maybe there has. I don't actually know. But when I looked before, there was very little evidence. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but don't go around telling people it's this wonderful thing, because we don't know. Might be. Talent, whatever the hell that means, 3 degree. MBTI, what about that? Is that okay, everybody? MBTI all right? Is that all right? Okay. Emotional intelligence, is that all right? Is that good? Okay, let's keep going. NLP, is that okay? Is NLP all right? No? Don't know? Okay, well, 55 of those 719 child providers say they do NLP. And they're not only that, they are masters or something. Master, super master NLP, whatever. Okay? I'm not the evidence police. I don't know if you should do it or not. But my limited understanding of NLP is it is based on completely erroneous assumptions about the way the brain works. And there's no particular evidence those techniques are effective. So is it okay as a professional body psychologist that people do that? I don't know. Is it? What do you think? I don't know. And if you think it isn't okay, what are you doing about it? I don't know. It's not up to me in a way to decide. Does anything go? Where do we kind of draw the line? Okay, what can we do about it? I think we'll revisit the values. What is it for? Consider what a minimum professional standard looks like. What is it? What is actually acceptable and what isn't? How are consultants different? How are we different to others? If we don't have evidence, then say so. Yeah, and Einstein didn't actually say this, though people think he did. He said something, he was alleged to say something like, if you had 1 hour to save the world, he'd spend 50 minutes analysing the problems and 10 minutes trying to solve it. And it seems to me that often in OP, what we do is we spend a lot of time, very little time analysing the problem, a lot of time implementing a solution. It seems to me it's kind of slightly the wrong way around. Okay. One thing I think we can do is to persuade our clients to be more evidence-based. This came out today in HR Magazine, which is an attempt to try and persuade HR to be more evidence-based. If HR gets into evidence-based management, then they will love what we do even more, because we can help them do it, but it must be persuading them. Finally, I think we just need to be psychologists, which means to use the body of theory and evidence, use critical thinking and scientific thinking, and use data to analyse and diagnose. Thank you.